In the world, according to Trump, you do what he says, but many foreign leaders ignored this over the weekend, leading the president to spend a good chunk of time issuing warnings, threats, and berating American adversaries. In an exclusive phone call with NBC's Kristen Welker, Trump said he was very angry and pissed off at comments made by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Now, Putin had called for a transitional administration in Ukraine, which in effect would mean pushing out current President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump told Welker, quote, "If Russia and I are unable to make a deal on stopping the bloodshed in Ukraine, and if I think it was Russia's fault, which it might not be, but if I think it was Russia's fault, I am going to put secondary tariffs on oil, on all oil coming out of Russia." Trump said this in an early morning phone call with NBC News on Sunday.
By secondary tariffs, Trump apparently means that whoever buys oil from Russia, quote, "you can't do business in the United States." Former President Biden had banned Russian oil imports after the country invaded Ukraine. And in 2023, according to the US Energy Information Administration, the US had imported only 10,000 barrels of petroleum and crude oil.
Trump also weighed in on Zelensky during a press gaggle. Let's watch what he had to say.
Zelensky, by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal. And if he does that, he's got some problems, big problems. We made a deal on rare earth, and now he's saying, well, you know, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems.
Trump also issued tariff threats to Venezuela, writing in part on Truth Social. President Donald J. Trump announced today that the United States of America will be putting what is known as a secondary tariff on the country of Venezuela for numerous reasons, including the fact that Venezuela has purposefully and deceitfully sent to the United States undercover tens of thousands of high-level and other criminals, many of whom are murderers and people of a very violent nature.
Then there's Iran. In another interview this weekend with NBC News, Trump discussed striking a nuclear deal with Iran, telling the outlet, if they, meaning Iran, don't make a deal, there will be bombing. It will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before.
But a defiant Iran rejected directed nuclear talks. President Masoud Pezeshkian ruled out direct talks with the Trump administration. During a cabinet meeting in Tehran over the weekend, he said this: "We responded to the U.S. president's letter via Oman and rejected the option of direct talks, but we are open to indirect negotiations instead."
In response to Trump being pissed off at Putin, Democratic Senator Mark Kelly wrote on X, "I'm angry too. I'm angry with the dictator Putin. He's a murderer. But I'm also angry with Trump, who made the boneheaded move of giving away the two best pieces of leverage before the negotiations started. That's why this is so messed up."
Punchbowl, congressional reporter Andrew DeSiderio wrote, definitely a shift in rhetoric from Trump. He's now threatening secondary sanctions, tariffs for Russian oil, and speaking about Putin in ways he never has before. So a lot of bluster at Iran and Venezuela, Russia, Ukraine, everybody. This is Trump's form of diplomacy, is deal-based. I think actually probably some Democrats and liberals were glad to hear him say that he's not happy with Russia right now, and that's what they want, right? Increased confrontation with various bad actors, or a willingness on our own government to acknowledge that there are bad actors. So that seems to be what Trump is doing as he tries to work through these various issues.
I'll get back to Russia and Ukraine in a second, but to your point about, what Democrats and liberals like or dislike, or ways in which Trump messes up the usual lines, one of the defenses of Trump from people, including of your own sort of political persuasion, was that he wasn't going around the world starting wars or threatening people. And this is a very marked shift on Iran, the idea that, Iran could get bombed if it doesn't do what Trump wants. Firstly, of course, there was a nuclear deal, which then Trump dismantled in his first term. But more to the point, during that first term, he had in fact ultimately ended up mocking people like John Bolton, who he had brought in. He said something to the effect of, if Bolton had stayed, we would have ended up in World War VI, because Bolton typically wants to attack everywhere. So is that not troublesome from a non-interventionist or libertarian.
Well, I think
perspective
it's
that he's issuing
troublesome.
those kind of threats.
I think it's troublesome from the most important perspective, which is that we need to be very China-focused. We can't have conflict with every single bad actor or, somewhere between good and bad actor or sketchy actor out there when we have to confront the realities of China. Now, of course, the Trumpian or the conservative perspective with Venezuela is that this is an attack on our own country, given the levels of immigration we have, so maybe you would still be dealing with that. The Russia-Ukraine situation is that these two entities are still quite far apart, and that makes me say, can we be less involved then? if they're not ready to work it out or have some kind of arrangement, does it have to be the United States to dictate the reality to them on that? Can't that just be Europe's responsibility?
Well, I mean, if it is ultimately left to the warring parties, Russia is presumably going to win, right? It's a much larger country, and Ukraine is dependent upon foreign aid to stave off that invasion. Now, if you hew to that position, which I think you do, then I think you also have to say, well, okay, are we okay then with saying that Russia can invade a sovereign neighbor and get away with it and take that territory? I think that is not a signal that I think is prudent to send, and I think that's where we differ on that.
I don't want to see even more tariffs initiated. Secondary tariffs now would be targeting countries that receive Russian energy exports. And now, of course, I have long said that the European leadership's position that Russia is so evil and contemptible and must be resisted and fought at all costs is not quite in line with their own addiction to Russian energy production. So maybe that would be fine. But we're going to get to a place where there are going to be very negative economic impacts on all of this. I don't think tariffs are a good thing. I don't think secondary tariffs are a good thing. So we need to start addressing some of these problems in mutually beneficial ways so we don't wreck our own economy.
But where I run into difficulties with that argument, and obviously this topic has surfaced a number of times in our conversations, is don't you acknowledge that there are serious negative repercussions if Russia ends up the de facto victor in having invaded a neighbor?
Yes, but there might not be anything, there's something we could do to prevent it. We could have an actual military confrontation with Russia. So the question is, can that be prevented at a cost that is acceptable to U.S. interests? I think that's the question. And my answer to that is possibly not, or even probably not. Now, we could risk losing something, we could lose something in order to have the Russian victory not be as total or complete as it otherwise would be, and I think that's where the negotiation comes in. Yes, I've said this before, if I could wave a magic wand and have Russia return to, have the borders go back to where they were before Russia invaded, I would do that. If I could wave a magic wand and have Vladimir Putin no longer be the leader of Russia, I would do that. I would do that for the leaders of Iran and Venezuela and China as well. But we live in reality. And in reality, we have to decide what can we reasonably do that will not put us, our people, at greater risk or be some cost or be destabilizing elsewhere. What can we do in reality? And that's where I'm not persuaded that there's much else to do, but be part of the negotiations if they're willing to take place, so that clearly Ukraine is going to have lost something, and that's going to be the situation, right? Because even the peace talks from the more reasonable democratic perspective, right, are not that Ukraine's getting back the territory.
100% of it, no. But it is, to your point about negotiations, and the point that Mark Kelly made in the tweet that we read, is the idea that even if you say, well, there has to be a negotiated settlement, by ruling out Ukrainian NATO membership and by saying that the United States will provide no security guarantees for Ukraine, Trump has effectively taken two of the major cards that we would hold off the table.
Well, it sounds like his perspective is that if even that is not good enough for Vladimir Putin, then he's going to tear up the deal, right? That is not okay then.
Right. Well, we shall see. We shall see if he follows through on that threat.
Up next on Rising, Trump's latest comments are sending shockwaves throughout the political world. Stay tuned.